Welcome. Welcome to Live Without Limits. Unlock your potential. The ultimate blueprint to transform and shift your mindset. I'm Davida Shinsky, and today we're talking about something we all deal with, whether we realize it or not, and that's how our ego reacts to criticism. If you've ever felt your stomach tighten when someone offered you feedback or found yourself getting defensive over something small, you are definitely not alone. Our reactions to criticism are deeply tied to a part of us called the ego. Remember, Freud came up with the ego, the id, the ego, and the superego. Now, when I say ego, I'm not talking about arrogance or being full of yourself. I'm talking about the psychological part of us that's built to protect our self-image, that part of us that wants to feel safe, respected, and worthy in the eye of others. The ego isn't bad. In fact, it's a natural and important part of being human. It's a When we don't understand it, it can quietly run the show, reacting automatically to anything that feels like a threat to our self-esteem, even when that reaction doesn't serve us. So in today's episode, we're going to get curious, not critical, about the ego. We're going to explore why it reacts so strongly to criticism, how those reactions can sometimes hold us back, and most importantly, how we can work with our ego instead of fighting against it. This isn't about judgment, it's about compassion. It's about self-awareness, and it's about stepping into a version of ourselves that's more resilient, more open, and more free. So let's get started. And as we do, I invite you to listen with an open heart, a curious mind, and a lot of grace for yourself. So, what is the ego and why it reacts? So, let's dive a little deeper into what the ego actually is and why it reacts the way it does when we face criticism. At the core, the ego is the psychological identity we build over time to feel safe, valued, and accepted in the world. It's the mental picture that we create of ourselves, who we think we are, how we want others to see us, and what we believe makes us worthy. The ego isn't inherently bad. It's a natural part of human development. It helps us build confidence, navigate social situations, and create a sense of belonging. But before the ego is so closely tied to our self image, it's also extremely sensitive to anything that feels like a threat, and criticism often feels exactly like that. Even when someone offers feedback kindly, the ego can interpret it as, "You're not good enough, you're wrong, you're flawed." And because the ego's job is to protect us, our sense of self-worth, it often reacts automatically without pausing to see whether the feedback might actually be helpful. Now, these reactions can show up in different ways depending on the situation and on the person. Defensiveness. You might instantly push back with "you don't understand," trying to explain, justify, or defend yourself without really listening. Blame shifting, and this is a big one. And remember, I already did a show on blame and how blame can create such a game with you that when someone else don't want to accept responsibility, they will blame you even though they're the one at fault. So instead of looking inward, the ego points outward. It's not my fault. Protecting itself by making someone else responsible for the problem. Withdrawal. Some people shut down completely. Fine, I just won't try anymore. A silent way of avoiding further pain by disengaging. Aggression. And sometimes the ego fights back with intensity. How dare you? Attacking the person giving feedback in order to restore a sense of power. None of these reactions make you a bad person. They are simply defense mechanisms, ways the ego tries to protect themselves when it feels exposed, embarrassed, or vulnerable. And here's something really important. Even constructive criticism, when offered with kindness and good intentions, can feel painful if the ego is already wounded or fragile. If deep down you're struggling with self-doubt, shame, or insecurity, any suggestion that you could do something better might feel like confirmation of your worst fears. The fear that you're not enough, the fear that you're failing, the fear that if people really saw your imperfections, they would reject you. But here's the good news. Once we understand that it's our ego reacting, not necessarily the truth about us, we can create a little space to breathe, space to choose a different response, space to grow. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about. How ego-driven reactions can limit our growth and how we can begin to shift into a more empowered way of handling feedback. Now that we understand why the ego reacts so strongly to criticism, let's talk about the cost of letting these reactions go unchecked. The truth is, the ego's automatic defensive mechanisms, as natural as they are, can quietly block learning, growth, and real self-awareness. When the ego feels threatened, it doesn't want to listen. It doesn't want to reflect. It doesn't want to change. Its first and only goal is to protect the current self-image, even if that means staying stuck in old patterns that aren't serving us anymore. So let's give you a few examples of how this plays out. Not accepting helpful feedback because it feels like an attack. Maybe someone points out a way that you can improve at work, in a relationship, or in a creative project. But instead of hearing it as an opportunity, the ego hears it as an insult. So you reject it immediately, losing a chance to grow. Sabotaging relationships or opportunities to protect pride. Maybe you pull away from people who challenge you, or you give up on a project too soon just to avoid the discomfort of being seen as imperfect. The ego would rather walk away than risk feeling less than. But in doing so, it cuts you off from deeper connections and success. Staying stuck because changing would mean admitting past mistakes. Growth often requires looking back and saying, I didn't handle that well. But if the ego sees mistakes as proof of unworthiness, it will resist change because admitting fault feels too dangerous. And so, as we stay in the same cycles, telling ourselves stories like, this is just who I am, even when a part of us longs for more. So here's the big shift that we need to understand. There's a difference between protecting your true self, your soul, and your deepest values, your authentic being, and protecting your ego. Before I go any further, I want to get into this. That I've used the DISC profile, and there's three things. There's your authentic self, there's the mask you wear, and there's your true self. And many of us don't really understand what our true self really is, or how it helps us in our interactions with people around us. So, your true self thrives on growth. It welcomes learning. It can hold imperfection with compassion and still feel worthy. Your ego, on the other hand, fears growth because it sees change as a threat. It clings to the old identities, old defenses, and old beliefs to avoid feeling vulnerable. When you learn to recognize the difference, you unlock a new kind of freedom. The freedom to say, I can be imperfect and still be valuable. I can hear feedback without losing my sense of self. I can grow and still be worthy right now. And that's what we'll explore next. How to work with your ego instead of against it, so you can step into a more resilient and empowered version of yourself. Now, let me go back and explain. There are 4 pure behavior patterns. The dominant one that believes they can control everything. The I, or the person with the good interpersonal skills that can talk to anyone. Now, these 2 are extroverts, but the next 2 I'm going to talk about are introverts. And the steadiness personality is the mediator. They do everything by the book. They totally want to be accepted. And then you've got the C, the conscientiousness behavior pattern. And this is the person who questions everything before they make decisions. But understanding that these behavior patterns also influence how you react through your ego. This is why I'm bringing up these behavior patterns. So, how to work through your ego instead of against it. There are tips for managing the ego's reaction to criticism. Pause first. Notice your physical and emotional reaction before responding. Remember, your body also puts off messages in your stance, in how you hear it, how you take it in, and how you internalize it. Get curious, not defensive. Ask, what part of me feels threatened right now? Separate your identity from your behavior. You made a mistake. You are not a mistake. Practice receiving feedback as a gift, not an attack, even when it's uncomfortable. Affirmations to calm the ego. I am safe even when I receive feedback. Feedback is information, not a judgment of my self-worth. Also, remember this, that we're always trying to talk about things that can help us to deal with who we are. And when we're talking about affirmations, what we're also doing is talking about the secret or the laws of attraction. And the laws of attraction is that whatever attitude or behavioral message you're putting out into the world is what is coming back to you. If you're a negative person, then negative things are going to happen to you. If you're a positive person, then positive things will come back to you. Now, I think this is a really good analogy. We just got a new pope, and in talking to his brothers, they always said that whenever as a kid he played games, he always wanted to be a priest, and that a neighbor said to him, someday you will be pope. If that is not a affirmation or a positive message to the universe that eventually came true. So understanding just how the laws of attraction works and how you can put out good things that can help you interact with the people around you, interact with the message that you want to give out, and think about how fragile your ego can be at times, especially when you feel that you're under attack. And sometimes I think it's just so sad that we have people that could use counseling and therapy to learn how to communicate much better, because how the ego reacts, I was talking earlier about personalities, and the disc was often used in corporations for training, because when managers are dealing with subordinates, they need to understand what their behavior pattern is and how to communicate with them more effectively, because you want to be on an even keel with someone here. You don't want to be looking down, talking to them, or that they feel that you're talking down to them. So understanding how to adapt communication also helps you come across much better when you're dealing with someone that you're working with, especially if you're the manager and they work underneath you. Often we don't understand how these things work. And I've noticed that today you do not see businesses offering the kind of training that they used to. And I was basically an independent consultant that came in with the assessment profiles and did train the trainer sessions, and then would work with their HR department in helping them to understand how to use my profiles and my courses to train and manage their people in the workplace. But in the beginning of the 21st century and towards the latter of the 20th century, corporations no longer offered train the trainer sessions for their employees. They only trained them on what they needed them to do, but not how to communicate with each other. And often you will see in the corporate environment burnout much, much faster because of what we're talking about today, which is the ego. And then you get people who are in the corporate environment that often leave and start their own business, but they don't understand you're going to have to cut your income and you're going to have to slowly increase it up to what it was when you worked in the corporation. That's why so many people, when they go and they want to leave they will start a business part-time on the side and build it so that once it equals what they're making in that corporate job, then they can leave. When someone leaves a job that pays the bills and then expects to get paid what they were by overcharging for their services, what they're going to find out is that no one is going to pay them that kind of salary. You have to work your way up to it. Criticism doesn't have to crush you. It can actually liberate you. When you're no longer controlled by the ego's need to always be right or perfect, you give yourself permission to grow, to evolve, to connect with others on a deeper, more authentic level. You start to realize that feedback isn't proof that you're failing. It's a bridge to becoming an even stronger, wiser version of yourself. You begin to live less from a place of fear and more from a place of freedom. I want to invite you to practice something simple but powerful. Notice your ego reactions, not with judgment, not with shame. Just notice when someone offers you feedback at work, at home, or even casually. Pause, check in with yourself, feel your reaction, and gently ask, is this my ego trying to protect me? Can I listen with curiosity instead of defense? Every time you do this, you're strengthening a new habit, a habit of self-awareness, of compassion, and of growth. Growth doesn't happen by force. It happens when we soften the ego's grip and open ourselves to learning, even when it's uncomfortable. You're not weak for feeling sensitive. You're not broken for feeling defensive. You're human and you are capable of incredible information. So thank you so much for being here today. And I hope that this episode resonated with you. And I'd love to share it with you. Love for you to share it with someone you know who you feel can benefit from it. And also, I want to cut into some things that I think are very, very important. Now, when we're dealing with a family, they fit in a way that they what makes them work. And we all know that different behavior patterns can clash. Now, as a child, you take what your parent says as gospel. But as you grow up, as you begin to think for yourself, and as your ego starts to come into play, then either it's going to strengthen you or it's going to weaken you based on what's going on. But remember this, how you react to people in public or to your peers often is how you were treated in the home. And if there's a lack of communication or it's a toxic environment, then how you interact with each other reflects the home you come from, because you're going to treat other people the way you were treated in the home. And sometimes people don't realize, and this is why I say communication, understanding behavior patterns, understanding each individual and how to treat people, because we've seen so much, especially in today's atmosphere of what's going on. We're seeing very much of racism, hostility, and who we are. And often those who are the most prejudiced are those who have the most fragile ego, that it makes them feel powerful to abuse other people simply because they don't know how to be any different. They're unwilling to be any different. They just are going to be who they are. And until we realize and can see that having someone who has such a fragile ego that they are constantly being negative, those are people you don't want to be around. And they may know how to say the right things to get you to hook into their beliefs, but remember this, they are who they are. They don't care about anyone but themselves. And just because they say something doesn't mean they ever especially are going to follow through. I can remember many, many, many years ago when I was a child, if my mother wanted me to do something, she would promise me something that she never had intention of doing or giving me or whatever. It was just a way to control me, to get me to do what she wanted me to do. And we see that going on now. And until we understand just how it's important for all of us to treat people as we want to be treated, because when you mistreat someone, then you're telling them that's how I expect to be treated. So in the future, don't expect them to talk to you any differently than you've talked to them or treated them or belittled them. How it's best to understand, treat someone the way you want to be treated, and in essence, you will be helping to build a stronger ego, to be able to take in criticism when you need to take it in, and understand how to give it when you need to give it.